Thank you. So this is our closing session. We have first a closing panel that will last around 45 minutes, and then I will give the floor to Heide Hackmann and to Karen O'Brien to make some final remarks. But first, we start with this final panel of the conference. Remember, the topic today is how can we make transformation deliberative, that is democratic, just, and equitable. And our panelists have been posed with a very broad, complex question. We are very happy to have here with us today Professor Gasper, Professor of Human Development at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. Thank you very much for being here. Sitting next to him, we have Jean Russell. She's an independent activist and created the Thrivability movement. I'm not sure I pronounced the word correctly.
Thrivability.
Thrivability, there. And we really look forward to hear from that. We are delighted to have with us Gunhild Stordalen. She is the founder and director of Greenwatch, and you were shown in the first day a video clip about the work that Greenwatch does. But in addition, she's a medical doctor, and she's working on climate change and health, which is a huge issue. Thanks for being here. And many of you who were at the Extreme Dialogue have already met Susie Moser, director of her own consultancy, and somebody with large experience on the academic and policy environments. So we have very different four perspectives, and all of them are going to speak very briefly during 5 minutes, trying to give some answers to these two very broad questions. How could a transformed world look like? And we have heard quite a lot of different visions, right? And then what will it take to get there? So with this, we're going to start with this. The floor is yours. Just 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Susanne. I've collected just some associated thoughts from following lots of lines of discussion here in the last 3-4 days. What could a transformed world look like? Well, many different things. And I think it's important, as in scenarios work, that we generate lots of different possible futures. I'm going to refer a bit to the work of the Great Transition Initiative from Stockholm Environment Institute, Boston office. I think many of you know it, but I find it still very rich and relevant. So you generate a family of types of scenario, including extreme scenarios. And the significance of extreme events is to make us think about the limits to systems and what happens when you encounter those limits. In a discussion group I was in maybe yesterday, we were talking about the Venus scenario in which the Earth's atmosphere in fact transforms and life as we know it disappears. On the first day, people underlined that hell doesn't sell, and yet that's what we need to think about. And in a sense, it fits. It doesn't sell because the people who are going to suffer most and first are the people without much purchasing power. And the hell scenarios, to put it crudely, are those which make us think about those who are the most vulnerable. So how to deal with that challenge of hell doesn't sell is a big issue from the conference. Second set of thoughts, what would it take to get there? Well, unfortunately, I think a hell of a lot. Because present trajectories are not just minor miscalculations requiring minor readjustments and lots of little innovations, I think. As some people point out, often the little innovations making certain things cheaper will just mean that we do more of them. And instead, I think, as summed up by the Earth Charter, the reorientations required are really fundamental in terms of relationship of people to nature, away from the modernist vision of dominating nature as something seen as something separate and subordinate. And I think Carl Volcker said the issue is not saving the environment as if it's something separate from us, but it's saving ourselves. Second issue, first is nature, second is personal identity and a sense of commitment to a long-run future and to future generations, which runs against the instituted logic of our capitalist systems, in which discount rates mean that we don't care about 100 years from now, let alone 200 years or 1,000 years. And we have a language which equates rationality to self-interest, which, as Dr. Behera said on the first day, is actually it's a disorder of the psyche. And the third reorientation, also highlighted in the Earth Charter, is around the community grouping that is the second face of identity, apart from the individual identity. What do you see yourself as belonging to? Well, we're in a nation-state system. And in fact, ever since the Westphalian system was established, which redirected a lot of the destructive energies seen in the religious wars in Europe through nation-state systems and into a capitalist system in which, as Albert Hirschman put it, the human passions get redirected into the pursuit of personal and national material interest. Well, we have a very deeply instituted set of systems there which are not going to change easily. Thinking about religious wars then also made me think, well, transformation here, in a sense, is going to require reformation of deformation. And that brings me back to the Great Transition Initiative, because their modeling of paths of change is that change of this fundamental level, in fact, is likely only to come through crisis. It will come through moments of series of crises, and the issue then is what will be the capacity for response at those periods of crisis which do arise. So lastly, let me say something about possible responses. Looking in the 20th century, response doesn't necessarily work the first time. So after the First World War, the system of response was inadequate and collapsed. And the 1945 world order, which was established, is only at the second, as it were, opportunity, after quite a bit of history in between. Great Transition Initiative is very informative on thinking through this logic of preparation for moments of crisis and opportunity, and then being better prepared for trying to take those windows of opportunity when they do come. In responding, I found the theme of metaphor very strong and relevant in much of the conference. We rely on the metaphor of economic growth, and yet, in fact, much of that growth is shrinkage of some values, but instead the prestigious term growth is captured by a particular model in which some biologists instead describe as cancer. because that's the uncontrolled, out of control growth. Various other interesting metaphors. I think metaphor is a big thing to work with. Connects to my next point, which is many of the discussions have been around young people. Young people may have the imagination still sufficiently energized to be able to contribute in the required transformations. I remember Neil Adger argued that child psychology suggests that our fundamental ways of thinking are largely fixed in the early years, which is what the Jesuits thought also. I'm worried, though, that a strategy of trying to influence young children only reaches the decision maker level 40 years later, and that may be too late. So my last point is in looking for areas of influence in the coming period, I'm particularly interested in how we can make change in universities, because universities are really central in many ways. They're a forum which is so unusual in terms of bringing fairly young people together with fairly experienced people, with a wide mandate for thinking and for innovation, and yet where in many ways we're still so blocked. I think Carl Volcker again commented on the bizarre frozen separations of knowledge which largely still dominate in universities. And last point was, I was reading the recent Oxford Handbook of Climate Change in Society, and which is excellent. I know Susie has a very good chapter in there. I looked up university in the index, and it wasn't there. And I don't think universities are so perfect that they don't need attention. I hope people haven't given up on them, but I think a lot of transformation, restructuring, rethinking is needed also in the way we live and work in universities.
Thank you very much, Seth. Chin, are you coming here, sitting there?
Can I get it high enough? Okay. First, I want to thank you all. I'm really honored to be here. I'm also honored to be on a panel that's mostly female. So men, I know you're not adequately represented, and I will hopefully take your questions later. So the first thing, before I get into my real comments, is hell doesn't sell. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel like we're already living in hell, so somebody must already be selling it. So they've already figured out how to sell it. How are we going to sell something else? So we were asked something about the future, how is this going to happen in the future? And I'm like, well, what timeline are we talking about? Are we talking about in the short term? Because when I talk about thrivability, I don't really mean that that's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, there might be small instances of it tomorrow, but I think the path forward is going to be pretty messy. There's going to be a lot of grieving. And so I'm not all that optimistic about the immediate future. That said, I think a lot of future scenario planning stuff goes into either a doom scenario or a utopian thing where we take one element and play it out either to its radical negative effect or its radical positive effect. And many people who are telling us those stories are motivated to do so based on what their financial stream is coming from. And so we need to take that into consideration, okay, and what is their agenda and why do they have it? So long term, we can talk about thrivability, and maybe that's 1,000 years from now when humans are gone and life takes over. I was really inspired. In fact, I started crying during Paul's talk earlier when he said, as soon as we stop intervening, all of a sudden life takes over, and it's the the little flower that blooms out of the sidewalk. It's like as soon as you stop killing it, it starts coming in. And I just started crying, feeling like, exactly. You know, thrivability is about life giving rise to more life all of the time. And this element it has of because I can-ness. Life has that. It can and it wants to. And so how are we hindering it, and how can we stop hindering that impulse? And maybe that's 1,000 years from now, maybe it's 100 years from now. I'm pretty okay with whatever that means. The universe is going to go on just fine without me, or maybe even without us. And I don't know at this point which direction it will go in. I hope, that me and you and our families and everything will thrive. And I think, and Paul and I talked about this briefly, we don't know which way it's going to go, because there are convergent catastrophes and there are convergent opportunities. So the book that I've just written is about all the convergent opportunities. I think we pay attention so much to what are the catastrophes at hand, where do we need to be fighting, that sometimes we forget where all the pieces are coming together, where are humans doing things together, and we've got positive deviance. Where is that happening, and how do we encourage more of that? Also, I think that we get these little memes in our heads about power laws. I work a lot in the tech world, and every tech business wants to have that little hockey stick phenomenon, right? Sorry, you're looking this way. So hockey stick phenomenon this way. And in natural order of things, a hockey stick is actually a pretty myopic view. If you start to expand out, you see in natural systems that they're S-curves. And because I think we cannot see enough, we cannot project when that S-curve is going to hit. And I think that's happening. These transitions are happening not only, this kind of S-curve thing is not only happening in finance and the economy and the environment, but also education. And the convergence of those things makes them incredibly hard to predict. So what can one person do? I've been working on social change for a long time and working with philanthropists on figuring out how to have a great impact. And what I've come down to is it's about shifting worldview and the cascade of individual actions that comes from everybody participating by that change in story. So I want to create a narrative that expands the possibility space, that transcends the variation in worldview, that is not based in a moral righteousness, but in a very pragmatic, how are we going to do this together, even across our differences? And I think that helps us, when we have that narrative, it helps us to develop the immune system that's so crucial right now for us to act as a whole organism in this transformation. So how are we going to go about this? I think thrivability, blossoming, flourishing, generativity, this sort of language is really important in selling the heaven that I want to see coming. I'm really interested in alternative currencies, and I don't just mean carbon credits. I think we've got an explosion right now of people trying out different ways to do alternative currencies, and when I started that work maybe 10 years ago, we were pretty skeptical and people weren't interested, but the way the economy is shifting, there's more and more opportunity in that space. Also, the technology is starting to catch up where we can really track. So if I know and can track where every piece of money I spend goes and has come from, I can take more responsibility for the path that it's been on. And I think trust and reputation are important. Our economic systems are based in trust. Money is based in trust. Our ability to cooperate together is based in trust. So I think building more systems that enable us not only to have the trust, but to know that we have the trust. We have to be able to see it. It has to become tangible to us that, yes, I do trust you, and who do you trust, and how can I see all of that together? So I invite you to thrivability, and I hope we can all work together towards that end. Thank you.
Gunhild, you can speak from there. Yeah.
It's always good to sum up a conference you haven't attended. I just flew in from Bergen. But I would try to comment and share some reflections with you anyway. And 2 points I would make. We have to connect the dots and we have to bridge the gap. Gro Harlem Brundtland, Norway's former prime minister, she once said in the 80s, everything is connected to everything. And that's quite true, and it's important, because today we are talking about climate change as one isolated issue. But indeed it's connected to global health, it's connected to food security, to access to clean water, to global security. And before we can make people understand that this cannot be solved alone as one issue, I think it's difficult to convince the majority that we have to act now. So integrating these issues, going from one problem to connect the dots, is critical. And as a doctor, I've been always fascinated by how we treat the problems instead of preventing them happen. Today's society is detrimental not only for our health, but for the environment. I think we need a shift of focus from treatment and adaptation to mitigation and prevention. And with respect to the climate and health issue and the link, the good news, and what we have to put a lot more focus to, is that a lot of the measures for tackling the epidemic of non-communicable diseases, like heart disease, strokes, diabetes type 2, the obesity epidemic, we have to tackle these and do the preventions, and a lot of them will be necessary with respect to the climate issue as well. Let's say active transport in cities, more walking and bicycling, and we need a shift of diet. We know that the meat industry is responsible for 1/5 of the emissions. At the same time, meat consumption is a risk factor for non-communicable diseases. So by doing these links, we could catalyze change. And the good thing, I mean, investing in a sustainable future and investing in climate measures is a long term. And that's always difficult to get money in today's short-term society. But the health benefits, the cool benefits, they are almost immediate. And we need more cost-benefit analysis showing the effect, and that actually some of the investment we are doing in climate measures can be taken on the health budget. So I think shifting to a society which is health promoting and where the sustainable healthy choices are the most easy and convenient for people would be the way forward. Thank you.
I really appreciated the wonderful art that we have seen, heard, felt over the last few days. And so I want to use my 5 minutes to actually revive an ancient art that dates back to maybe 4 or so major human transformations back. It's still an art and mastery that is practiced by some elders among us, and I am no more than an apprentice to it. If I were really a master at it, I would not need a piece of paper. This particular art is called mirroring, and I will now attempt to mirror back to you what I heard for the last few days in answers to what is it going to look like and how are we going to get there. Every word on these 2 pages are your words. Maybe. Well, if you ask me now, what brought us together? I would say emergency. The great emergency. Some called it climate change, and others poverty and injustice. The familiar litany, the ugliness that may cost us our skin. The 883-meter in diameter pimple on the face of the earth. The catastrophized future. And if you ask me now, I'd say we were lost in the middle of that forest. Oddly enough, we barely considered the trees or the ravens, but it seems like we wanted to be found. We stood in the middle of a forest on fire, and we were looking for soul. We were wanting a purpose. We wanted to help, all geared up and impatient, and yet somehow treading water, standing in place, but not still. Willing and well-intentioned for sure, looking for direction and ready to prepare the ground for something new to grow out of. But if you ask me now, the door didn't open quite yet. We looked to innovation and to imagination. We looked to systems and leaders. We looked to others for failure and to ourselves for success. We looked for love in all the wrong places. We even invited a trickster who twisted our minds, who seduced us to believe we could replace the multi-armed carbon with a one-handed H. Surely there is a destiny, a land without dragons. In the meantime, we were like dogs without owners. We continued doing what we pleased. So if you ask me now, I'd say we didn't break terribly new ground. We barely looked at the necessity of breaking down old structures, including those within our own worlds of living and working, or those within ourselves. But maybe we started to build a raft to cross an unknown sea. Maybe, at least, we started gathering some wood, some rope, some reeds, while others sat down in the midst of our collective madness to learn to read the stars to navigate out of the hell that they sold and we bought willingly. Yes, if you ask me now, I'd say we started to help each other through, even if we could barely imagine the toward. We at least named how transformation sucks, how continuity and stability are bloody lovely things, how we are interested in just a tiny bright slice of a possibly dark future, how much love we will need, how the voices of the future are already among us. We began to recognize the discomfort and promise in diverse adventures of living. It started to dawn on us that we wanted a guidebook, but that there was none. And if there were, we would have to throw them out as soon as we would start moving. So if you ask me now, surely it was not a non-event. We accepted the responsibility of being the lucky ones. We acknowledged how bad we actually are at being change makers. We woke up and started to take some liberties, such as the liberty to reinvent what it means to be human. We considered the possibility of transformation not being what is yet to come or to be created, but what we're already finding ourselves in. We considered the possibility of acting dutifully toward the future, to act morally now, to take care of the future. We found ourselves to be in the middle of the ultimate cuddle and saw that it was from that a novel world would have to unfurl. We found that our choice was not to lead or go home, but to go home and lead.
Wow. Wasn't prepared for that. Susie Moser, the poet. Thank you, the poet also. Thank you very much. I mean, evidently we have 4 different narratives, 4 different stories with a lot of similarities and with very different particularities. But I think there is this tension, which I think it's in the room and has been here for the past 3 days, that some things are doable and they are doable now and immediately. Some things require a lot of effort and a lot of deep thinking. And that just by asking the questions and by thinking about it, we create that draft. So that's what I heard from this. We are running very much out of time. I'm very tempted to sort of do my own thing. I would like to please give the word to the floor again, to let you speak, to say something, to react. Or is everybody tired? It's this time of the day where I need to do all the work. Please. Where are the microphones? Here? Please say your name when the microphone comes.
My name's John. I'd like to reflect that being here for me has been quite a scary and disorienting experience. And I got very, very scared yesterday. I was lost and didn't know where I belonged. And I wasn't sure that I would be held in the process. So to come to today and to remember who I was and to find a place amongst the voices, particularly of the young people and women and poets, and to find that we can create this has been very special, so thank you.
Thank you. We have a question in the back, all the way in the back.
Thank you. My name is Henrik Sinding Larsen from Oslo. I was thinking about the dilemma about optimism versus pessimism. And I think sometimes I feel a bit terrorized by optimism. In the sense that we should all be moved by optimism and solutions and love and everything good. I think there's a lot of creativity in pessimism. And I would like to cite a Norwegian philosopher that was the inspiration for Arne Næss, and his name is Peter Wessel Zapfe, and he wrote the following: "As long as we cling to the fateful illusion that humankind is destined to prevail, nothing of importance will change." And he's reckoned as a great pessimist. But I read some optimism in that, in that I think that we need to go through pessimism. There is no optimistic way ahead. I think we need crisis and pessimism, and to make it all sounds positive is a dangerous pathway. And I should just add that he said this in 1933, so he was very early on.
Thank you very much. We have another 2 hands here, this side here. Right there. Right there.
Hi, my name is Maria Erling. I represent Simultaneous Policy. I write books about love, fear, integrity. And the way I perceive it is that we are constantly on a wave. And we have times when we are in a flow and things are falling into places, and we meet the right people at the right time and connecting like I have felt these days. And then we also come into periods of time which I call life learning. And life learning, another way to put it, is a pessimistic way. and the life learning times of our lives is when we come into fear, and we doubt, and we sadness or grief. And those are the times when we learn, when we develop. So it's to embrace that we have both flow in our lives and that we have life learning points of our lives.
Thank you. Anant.
Hi, I'm Ananta Giri. This challenged us to think about university and the link, the transformation of university to the challenge of climate change, which needs further elaboration and meditation. Along with that, also the way education at all levels, school education, for example. But in Scandinavia, we have the very inspiring history of people's education, the folk high schools. In Sweden, the study circle movement. In India, we have the panchayat, the village communities. So to think of education in its limited and broad sense of public learning, and think of public libraries, for example, which is also a gift of Scandinavia, to link public library into climate care movement. My second query and submission is that in this conference, we have heard both voices of connection and connectivity, including our plenary speaker, talked about understanding connectivity in a particular way that is deeply significant. And also the other voice of disjunction, of violence. So the challenge is to look at connectivity in the context of existing disjunctions and contradictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like, do we have more questions? Sorry, the last one.
Just one reflection on the discussions here. It was remarked by one of the young contributors earlier today that we really need a vision of the future, and several visions were mentioned throughout the conference. Many of them were positive in the sense of being optimistic. I'm not sure that pessimism is the way to go, but I do think that any positive vision of the future, meaning it's a particular specific vision that you can describe, to think about, should have real people in it. And that's one thing that I would recommend. They, people with all their failings, with all the differences between people, can you think of a world that will be environmentally sustainable and socially equitable? I think that you can. I think that you can do that, but it's tricky, it's uncomfortable. But if you can create such a vision, it is much easier to have a transformation. I would also say that I almost didn't say this because Susanne Moser's beautiful poem, I know you attributed it to the words here, and I heard where they were coming from, but you put it together, and it really covered a lot of that complexity. So I think that captured it well.
Thank you very much. And keeping up with these comments, I think that visions of the future that must have human beings, evidently it's about connecting the dots, and I think that perhaps Gunhild can elaborate more on the situating climate change as part of many other different issues in order to raise awareness, because I think it's an extremely important point, as well as the idea, of course, of co-benefits. And then the issue of structures and not really digging enough. And I think that all of you have talked about that. I would like to challenge you in 2 seconds that I'm going to give you to each of you to give some final remarks. Tell us what is one of the most important structures we need to really unsettle, deconstruct and reconstruct. Just one. If I can say that challenge, but you don't have to take it. So maybe we start the other way around. Do you want to start first, Susie?
I guess my first thing always goes to the ones in myself, the structures that I have set up, whether they are my mental frames or whether that's my the limits of my hope, or whatever I think is possible or impossible. I think that's the first one, and that's the one I have most control over, even though it's maybe the hardest one. I can break all kinds of other things, but I think that internal one I find hardest to actually really undo.
Thank you. Gunhild?
I just would like you to give the question one more time. What do you really mean by changing this or changing the structure?
Yeah, I mean, what are one of the issues that we really need to work more in order to raise more awareness and actions and create incentives for actions? What would be one of the areas? I mean, you have already given an answer, which is about connecting the issues.
I think a very important issue is to change the dialogue and change the way we talk. Talking about 400 ppm doesn't make any sense for most people. If you are translating these terms into something that people understand, that business leaders understand, if you are talking about opportunities, I'm afraid of the pessimistic scenarios. I think we should talk about the half full glass of beer rather than the half empty.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was extremely important issues. Jean?
A lot of people that are attracted to thrivability are Bucky Fuller fans, so I have to go with, I'm not interested in taking down something else. Just starve it by creating, structures that do work. And I think I agree with Susan that it's about, constantly being aware of how any system within me is generating the systems outside of me. And I find myself in a practice of always asking, how is this perpetuating the system that was, and how can I do it differently? And thank God I'm somebody who I build systems and I cannot operate within them. I have to tear them down all the time, so it's kind of compulsive for me to constantly be doing that. But I think it's a lot of us need to focus on what do we want to build instead.
Thank you very much. Des?
I said already what I feel I can do something about is in the university world where we have such potential and do relatively little with it. There are lots of nice experiments, but they're not the mainstream in research, in education, etc. I liked also very much Jean Russell's point that apart from thinking about coincidences of problems which come together in crisis, we think about the coincidences of opportunities for living more freely and reacting more creatively.
Thank you very much. So with this note, I would like to please help me out. Welcome. Oh, we have a question in the back.
Yes.
It has to be very, 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 very fast.
Very, very short. My name is Tone Bjordam, and I'm an artist. And when I've been listening to this, first I thought that we should make a huge organization, like out of the UN, like something that comes up from the science world, but that can give people clear answers. But then I thought again, of course we have the UN climate panel, but then I thought again, maybe it doesn't have to be so complicated. Maybe the point would be to make a platform, because we have so much information everywhere on the internet and everywhere about how we can solve problems and stuff like that. But I wish we could make together a platform which is global, which can give people very simple information that everyone can understand. Like really, really simple, and then the solutions on how everyone, no matter if they're in a private household or if they are a boss in a big company or whatever it is, many clear answers on how they can, very concrete, that how we can solve this together,
Okay.
Because there's so much information, why not trying really to make it simple?
So with the idea of a global platform of simplicity and communication that people understand, I think it's a good thought. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you. I give the floor Thank you. Give the floor very quickly to Heide Hackmann, Secretary General of the International Social Science Council, who's going to give some closing comments on taking social transformation seriously.
Thank you, Asun. Gosh, it's really difficult to know whether there is anything else that is still to be said, certainly at the level of creativity of what we've just witnessed. So I'm just going to go back to my usual mode, which is to be pragmatic and to think, so now what? Where do we take this? What is your job now? And that is to go and do research, right? So what I want to do is just to talk to you very, very briefly about a very pragmatic, huge organization that has been set up, which hopefully will create a platform and an opportunity for you as researchers to take transformation, this issue of transformation, seriously, to work with the practitioners, the artists, the decision makers that have joined us at this conference in doing that. But before I tell you that story, and in case I run out of time, I want to take the opportunity of asking you to join me to thank the one person in this room who all of us know without a shadow of a doubt is serious about transformation. She's creative, she's committed, she's brave, she's incredibly bright, she's brought us together. Please join me in thanking Karen O'Brien. Do we really need to continue? All right, so let me tell you this quick story. First of all, from a research perspective and from the perspective of somebody who tries to set up structures and opportunities for researchers to do bigger, better, bolder, different types of research at the international level, the conclusions I take from the discussions I've heard in the last 3 days is that transformative knowledge production will require open knowledge systems, what David Tabara talks about as open knowledge systems that involve mutual networks of learning. And it involves collaboration. It requires collaboration. It requires, I think most of the people here are social scientists, right? So let me start there. It requires collaboration between social scientists. It requires collaboration between social, natural, human, engineering sciences. It requires collaboration between different knowledge holders. Recognition that academics and non-academics are, at different points in time, all producers and users of knowledge. So it requires collaboration between science, society, decision makers, artists, NGOs, etc., etc. And it requires collaboration between knowledge holders from different parts of the world. We take that for granted, but we shouldn't. That there are multiple epistemic communities that need to collaborate. The other conclusion that I've heard is that we don't have the spaces for making that kind of collaboration a reality. And so people are asking for safe spaces. And I think that the international science organizations that you see on the screen have come together and recognized that that's a real problem, that there are institutions and academic systems that don't recognize, reward, and celebrate the kind of science, the kind of knowledge production that we're calling for. So I can't go into the details of this, but essentially this is an organization, informal, called the International Science and Technology Alliance for Global Sustainability. And they came together in 2010 to establish a new initiative, a 10-year international program called Future Earth. And many of you in this room have been involved in that process of designing, setting up, even in the beginning stages of imagining this. Now, if you look at the history of Future Earth, and I'm sure a lot of you know about Future Earth, and I don't have the time to go into details here, but I'll put up the website address, the URL address for you, and would encourage you to sign up for the Future Earth newsletter so that you can follow the opportunities that this offers you potentially. But if you look at the history of establishing Future Earth, you could regard it as incremental change, and you could regard it, on the other hand, as radical change. Incremental because if I think about my own career 15, 16 years ago, even more actually, I was involved in South Africa in setting up, together with UNESCO support actually, a program called Global Change and Social Transformation, and its primary ambition was to bring together the natural and the social sciences. And here I am, 16 years later, trying to work with others to do the same thing. So I have spent a lot of time in the last few years thinking that I'm just going round and round in circles, but I have come to realize that it's more spiral. But that's the incremental side of the story. The radical side of this, and why one could also think of Future Earth as a kind of successful story of transformation at the science systems level, is a few details. Let me share these with you. So, for example, when we first started meeting with the natural science community about envisioning what the possible research agenda of such a global initiative should be, we were talking about this as an Earth system science program. And the one or two social scientists, and I look fondly at some of them who are in this room, who were at that first meeting in September 2009, we just argued and said, you will never get the social sciences involved if you speak the language of Earth system science. Today it's called Future Earth Research for Global Sustainability. So it's slightly different language. It helps. In that first meeting, ISSC, the International Social Science Council, was invited to participate as an observer. Today, we co-chair this alliance of international bodies. That's a major achievement. That's a radical change for the social science community. The Earth System, the Future Earth Science Committee has just been appointed. And I'm sorry I don't have a picture of all the folks that have been nominated. Two of them are here with us, Susie Moser, Karen O'Brien. I think that you're the only two in the room that are members of the Science Committee. But we have half-half social science, natural science. We have one person who represents the humanities, not enough, but he's there. We have equal number of men and women. We have some younger people. We don't have the usual suspects that have been around forever and ever. So it's a different profile, and it's a different game. And what is really different is that the Science Committee is not going to be the only decision-making committee about what kind of research gets done and who's going to be doing that research. But Future Earth will have a multi-stakeholder governing council. So there will be a multi-stakeholder group that will be steering this new ship. So these are big changes. The biggest one for me is that if you look at the work that the team of scientists and other actors we got involved in designing the kind of overall strategy for Future Earth, including the conceptual work and the possible research themes that an initiative like this should tackle. If you look at that work, they came up with three very big overarching thematic focal points. The one is dynamic planet, which sounds a bit Earth system-y, but it's intended to be inclusive. All the themes are intended to be inclusive of natural social science perspectives. Dynamic planet. The second one is global development, where really the resource issues, essential ecosystems, etc., fall under that. And the third one is transformation to sustainability. That's one of the three themes of Future Earth. So surely this is an opportunity. Surely this allows us to now move. The problem is, Future Earth at this stage is an institutional framework. It's an ambition space.
It brings together existing international global environmental change programs and the projects that they have, very successful projects that many of you are involved in, that those programs have given rise to. But it's more than that. It's an ambition to do research differently, to produce knowledge that is solutions-oriented, that is integrative, that is integrated, and that delivers knowledge in a time frame where we recognize the urgency of the issues we're dealing with. So it's an opportunity. Those organizations that include the funders, by the way, and that's really important. The Belmont Forum is a group of major national global environmental change research funders. We cannot guarantee the success of Future Earth. You have to do that. I don't have to tell you what the challenges are. I think the poem that Susie has put together so creatively from your words indicate what the challenges are. We can't impose from the international science organizations collaboration. We can't do that. It has to come from the communities, and that requires trust. Trust requires time. We're running out of time. So you have to step into this space, and that's my challenge to you. It's a pragmatic challenge, and I hope that you see it as, that you see Future Earth as an opportunity to take on that challenge. And we would like to suggest that the participants list, if with your permission, that we include that in the database of contacts, so that you at least get information about Future Earth as this unfolds and as you help us shape this. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so we are almost there. Some last words by Karen.
First, I don't know how to thank you all so much for these past 4 days. Yeah, it's hard to even find words for it. As I just do this kind of summary and the next steps, I'm going to show a film that we created for the Extreme Dialogue about extreme choices. And this was made by Clive Ardaugh at Onward Productions. And I think it's just, you know, to put it behind me, and we're going to have it available on the site. It's really beautiful in that transition and transformations that we're talking about. And it just has some slight music. So, first of all, again, thank you so much for coming here. We've had 4 days of dialogues, discussions, questions, ideas, and things about transformation that have really, I think it's put lots of us out of our comfort zone. It's been a little bit scary. And for those of us who have organized it, it's been really, really rewarding. Because as Heide says, you know, this is really what Future Earth is going to be dealing with, what it's going to be about. And the next steps, very dramatic to be talking in front of this tar sands. The next steps that we have to take really have to be collaborative. It's all really about, you know, what we do following this. And as most of us are researchers, one of the big questions that comes up is publications. What's going to come out of this? And maybe it's getting too loud. Okay. This is getting overdramatic. Thank you. We're talking about what types of publications will come out of this. And as this is an IPCC co-sponsored meeting, we will have IPCC proceedings that will try to capture the many different dimensions and perspectives that we've heard here. Because one of the things that we struggle with is that I think I was supposed to, yeah. Maybe this was maybe this wasn't a great idea, but I really wanted to show it because we asked Clive to make this like 3 weeks before the meeting, and for a documentary filmmaker to be given that much pressure, and the things that could you capture all the different extremes that we experience, not just extreme fear, but extreme joy, extreme hope, extreme promise, and all of that. He did a wonderful job, and we didn't have time at the extreme dialogue. So going on to the publications. Besides the IPCC proceedings, we really hope that we will self-organize as a community and publish special journal issues, collaborative articles, co-authored articles, different ideas, and even work together to come up with different projects that might fit under Future Earth. New ideas, novel types of bringing different groups, different disciplines, different perspectives together in this. So when we leave here today, we're going to have, we're establishing a collaboration platform, which I'll tell you more about in collaboration with Integral Collaborative Services. We're also talking about when we will actually meet again, and the Stockholm Resilience Center has offered to host a conference on transformation in 2015. The University of Dundee has offered to host a conference in 2017, and CICERO is willing to consider hosting a conference in 2019. And we need to have meetings and conferences and get-togethers around the world, and I'm sure Future Earth will be organizing it. The Joint Programming Initiative on Climate Change had something right before our, the conference on that. And all over the world, I think we need to start having different types of discussions and dialogues to take these questions further. So with that, I think that, you know, we are a community that came together here with lots of different possibilities for the future. And this isn't then the end when we say goodbye. What I want to do right now is just to say thank you. You all gave me the nicest thank you I've ever had, and I feel really humbled by that. But I want to really thank my co-organizers, Asun St. Clair, Eva Bakkerslet, Heide Hackmann, Per Olsen up there, and Linda Signa. Where's Linda Signa? I'll be quiet during this last part. Future Earth, we're deciding it. It's up to our extreme choices, really. I'd also like to thank the Scientific Advisory Board who helped us along the way in making decisions about this, and also many of you served as chairs at the very last minute on our conferences. I mentioned on the first day that we started the conference with just an idea, no project, no funding. And again, I would like to say thank you to the sponsors who have really backed us up and came out. And I'll start first with my very own Department of Sociology and Human Geography, because they gave the first money. They said, yes, we believe in this and you can do this. And so when you have just a little bit of money, you have leverage, so you can go and ask for money. So the University of Oslo and the Department of Sociology and Human Geography and the Faculty of Social Sciences played an enormous role in triggering this event. But it wouldn't have been possible without the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of the Environment, the Climate and Pollution Agency, CLIF, the Research Council of Norway, the Stordalen Foundation, Flytoget, Fritt Ord, CICERO, the Stockholm Resilience Center, the International Social Science Council, the Center for International Climate and Environmental Research Oslo, or CICERO, finally, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I'm very grateful for Dr. Pachari and all the leaders, especially Working Group 2, and we have Katie Malk here representing the Technical Support Unit. They really are pushing this idea of transformation within IPCC, and I think we have to give them a lot of credit for that. And finally, Future Earth for saying that, yes, this is actually an important conference. Before then I end, I want to also thank the Karina Mullen for doing these beautiful drawings here. And we'll make those available on the web. Also, Eva Bakkerslet for really bringing the art into the conference and curating it in such a beautiful way. So thank you, Eva.
And then I would like to thank the volunteers for this conference, the ones in the yellow t-shirts who have been working so hard, and under the guidance of Marit Oksod. I'd like them all to come down here, please, the ones who are here. In appreciation of all their help, we're going to give them, and this is kind of embarrassing, but we just this week published the book, A Changing Environment for Human Security, Transformative Approaches to Research, Policy, and Action. And this is a result of the conference we held in 2009, and it just came out. So 4 years later, we did it. I'd also like to thank Congress Conference for helping us with all the details of organization. You've been in touch with them with the registration and everything, and they made it very, very easy for us. But finally, and you heard me say this the first day when she wasn't even in the room, I'd really like to thank, is she here? Linda? Come down here, Linda. Linda is the one who has the courage, and she's the one that really made this happen. I was the scared one that was just going like this all the time, and she's just said, when there was another conference that was scheduled to be here this week, she changed it. She moved their conference to another day. Anything that they said they can't take furniture out of a room, they took furniture out of the room. Time after time again, when we wouldn't get anything, it was you that did it all. So Friday is taco night and red wine night for Linda. So here is, yes, and thank you. So why don't you say?
Thank you so much. I've been quiet the whole time because I've been running around trying to keep track of things, but I have talked to many of you outside here, and I really enjoyed these days, and I'm so happy that we have this community, and I hope we can keep in touch in the other conferences that will come, and also through exchange, because that's really the valuable thing about our work. We have the network out there, and we keep that alive. So thank you for coming, and safe travel home. Thanks. Share this.
And just two final announcements. We're having the Transformative Leadership Workshop in the Red Room tomorrow from 9 to 5, and I will be making coffee for you for that. And those of you who have not officially registered, please go to the registration desk and meet with Jeff Fitch. Normally conferences end with everybody just going yay and running off to their flights and things like that, but since we had a lot to do in this afternoon, we didn't have a break, and we decided instead to have a midsummer toast to a sustainable future with a little bit of champagne out there so everyone can have that last dialogue, that last mingle, that last uncomfortable feeling. So thank you all for coming.